Hello? You're just a waiter, right? My cousin mocked at the reunion. Everyone laughed. I said sure, then pulled out my business card. The room went silent when that line didn't just hang in the air, it landed. Hard. Like a slap with a velvet glove. Polite on the surface, condescending underneath. I was balancing a glass of ginger ale when my cousin Todd said it, and I swear the whole room paused, half laughing, half holding their breath, waiting to see how I'd respond. It was our annual family reunion, and Todd, as usual, had arrived with the subtlety of a foghorn. Polished Rolex peeking from beneath his cuff, hair slicked back like he just stepped out of a car commercial, and that same smug tone that always seemed a few degrees away from mockery. We were in my uncle's lake house in Vermont, the kind of place that smelled like old wood and slow money. The cousins were all back, some with kids, some with significant others, and me? I'd shown up alone, in dark jeans and a charcoal wool sweater, not flashy, not loud. The kind of outfit that didn't beg to be noticed. But Todd noticed. He always did. And this time, he pounced. You're just a waiter, right? Everyone chuckled, not because it was funny, but because they thought they were in on something. Some silent joke about how little I'd accomplished compared to Todd, the venture capitalist with a habit of name-dropping cities like they were middle names. I smiled. Slow. Calm. Not fake. Sure, I said. And then I pulled out my card. The kind you don't hand out to just anyone. Matte black. Embossed. Clean. Just a name, mine, followed by a title, founder and CEO, the Halcyon Group. Then, just below that, Upscale Hospitality Concepts, New York. Boston. San Francisco. Miami. The silence? Beautiful. It fell over that room like the snow outside, sudden, soft, and absolute. You could hear someone's ice cube settle in their glass. I didn't gloat. I didn't explain. I just handed it to him, and took a sip of my drink. Todd blinked. Someone, I think it was Aunt Lorna, leaned in and whispered, "Wait, that Halcyon? The one with the rooftop speakeasies and the 6-month reservation lists? The group that just made Forbes?" "Yeah. That Halcyon." Todd's smirk faltered. And that was just the beginning. I didn't stay long after that. After Todd's smirk melted into something close to confusion, or maybe fear, I made the rounds. Hugged Aunt Lorna. Chatted briefly with my cousin's kids. Even made small talk with Uncle Don about his vintage snowmobile. But I could feel the room watching me now, like I'd suddenly turned into something they didn't quite understand. That night, I drove back to the lodge I was staying at, a place I'd built ties with during our expansion into Vermont. Warm fire, quiet staff, windows that framed the icy lake like a painting. I sat in the bar, ordered my usual, and let the silence settle around me. My phone buzzed. A text from my assistant. "FYI, Todd sent an email through the Halcyon site. He wants to grab coffee this week. Should I respond?" I stared at the screen. Coffee? From the guy who hadn't texted me in 5 years? Who, 3 hours ago, laughed with everyone else when he thought I was wiping down tables in a chain restaurant. I typed back. No reply. Just flag him for now. I wasn't angry. Not really. But I'd learned something important over the years. When people underestimate you, they tell you who they really are. Not in big declarations, but in slips, in tones, in laughs they think you won't notice. So I started watching. That week, I looked deeper into Todd's world. Not out of spite, not yet, but curiosity. My team owed me a few favors. I'd helped a few of them out of tricky investor situations before, and they were happy to return it. It didn't take long. Todd had recently tried to buy a property in Boston, a gorgeous brownstone in Back Bay he was calling his next flip. Real estate wasn't his world, but he liked playing the part. I knew the property well. It was in the same area we were quietly scouting for our next Halcyon concept. He'd made an offer. It hadn't closed yet. I called my head of acquisitions. "You see the one on Marlborough Street?" He was quiet for a beat. "Yeah. We passed on it last month." "Don't pass this time," I said. "Go back in. Full cash. Slightly over asking. Quiet deal. He didn't ask why. He just said, "Got it." I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Not out of vengeance. Not yet. But because a man who laughed at the word, waiter, was about to learn just how expensive underestimation could be. By the following Thursday, the Marlborough deal was done. Cash talks. Especially in real estate. Especially when it's discreet, fast, and no contingencies. My acquisition team sent over the closing documents for review, and I signed them while sipping espresso at one of our Manhattan properties. The property Todd wanted, the one he told everyone at the reunion was going to triple in value in 2 years, now belonged to me. But here's the fun part. I didn't move into it. I didn't gut it. I didn't even list it under my name. I handed it off to our interior design partners, gave them a simple brief: keep it elegant, understated. Turn it into something we could use for private client tastings, VIP events. They didn't need to know why. 3 days later, Todd posted a vague complaint on LinkedIn, something about dishonest buyers swooping in on investment deals. It got 4 likes and 1 comment. That's the game, buddy. I didn't comment. But I saw it. Meanwhile, I sent a bottle of aged Japanese whiskey to the real estate broker, the one who had worked both sides of the deal, with a note that simply said, "Appreciate your discretion. Let's do this again sometime." The next ripple happened a week after that. Our Boston GM forwarded me a resume. Someone applying for a regional operations director role. Impressive background. Strong references. Recent VP level experience. I nearly laughed when I saw the name. Lauren West. Todd's right hand. The woman who basically kept his ventures from burning to the ground. She was sharp. Too sharp for the kind of work Todd gave her, always reactive, always firefighting. She must have seen the writing on the wall. I didn't reach out. I didn't recruit her. But I did offer her the job. And she accepted. Quickly. Quietly. Todd wouldn't even know until she handed in her notice. And by then, the damage would be done. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to flex. I just moved a few pieces on the board, and let the silence do the rest. Todd had tried to shrink me down to a job title. Now he was watching his foundation crack. And I hadn't said a single unkind word. The invitation went out mid-February. Cream stock paper, embossed silver lettering, hand-delivered by courier. It was for a private investor showcase, one we hosted every quarter at the Halcyon Collective. Normally, we kept these events tight. 15 to 20 names, high-net-worth individuals, private equity scouts, luxury brand liaisons. But this time, we expanded the guest list. I told my team to include a few newcomers. People sniffing around for capital. People like Todd. He had just launched a boutique spirits brand, one of those, artisanal whiskey, startups with a nice label and no actual product in stores yet. I knew about it because he'd posted a teaser on social media a week earlier. Big pitch meeting next month. Let's go. I made sure he got the invitation. Not from me, from our events team. When he arrived at the Manhattan flagship, he walked in like he owned the place. Navy suit, pocket square, even a cigar case tucked under his arm. He thought he was going to dazzle a room full of potential backers. And in a way, he was. Just not the way he expected. I was already there, speaking with a couple of international investors near the atrium. Todd spotted me and blinked, confused, like someone recognizing a celebrity in a crowd and trying to place where they've seen them before. Then I saw the moment it clicked. He walked over, fake grin in full force. "Didn't know you'd be here," he said, voice tight. I smiled easy. "Hosting, actually. Welcome to Halcyon." The color drained from his face. We were standing beneath a chandelier imported from Verona, in a room filled with silent judgment. Investors in suits turned curious. I extended a hand, as if he were a guest in my home, which, in a way, he was. His pitch was scheduled for later that evening. I could have cancelled it. But I didn't. I let him present. I stood at the back, sipping a drink, saying nothing. And when the investors glanced in my direction afterward, silently asking for my read, my unspoken approval, I gave them the smallest shake of the head. Not rude. Not dramatic. Just enough. His slide deck didn't matter after that. When the event wrapped, he came up to me again. Flustered. Eyes darting. "What are you doing, man? You trying to tank me?" I tilted my head. "Todd, you're mistaken. I'm just a waiter, remember?" He didn't respond. Just stood there. The same silence from the reunion was back, but this time it was heavier. He wasn't laughing anymore. The funny thing about power? It doesn't have to announce itself. It just shifts the air. That night, after the investor event, I didn't hear from Todd. No calls, no messages, not even one of those half-hearted "Great to see you" texts people send after failing publicly. But someone else did reach out. My Aunt Lorna. It started with a casual check-in, the kind of message that said, "Hey, I'm suddenly remembering you exist now that people are whispering your name at fundraisers. Hey sweetheart, just wanted to say, I had no idea you were doing so well. We're all so proud of you." Proud. That word sat wrong in my chest. Not because I needed the validation, I was well past that, but because it was the same woman who, 3 months earlier, had laughed when Todd made that joke. The same woman who once told me I should have studied something more practical after I dropped out of business school to start Halcyon. And now? Now she wanted brunch. It kept happening. Cousins who hadn't texted me in years were in the city next week. Uncles who once called me a dreamer now wanted to pick my brain over a steak. Even my own parents, divorced, barely on speaking terms, independently reached out within days of each other, each pretending not to know the other had already called. I said yes to none of them. Not out of spite. Just out of clarity. I'd built something real, and they hadn't seen it, or hadn't wanted to. Until it became visible. But it was Todd's silence that spoke the loudest. Word got around. People whispered about the Marlborough property, how he'd lost it, how the deal fell apart at the last minute. Then came Lauren's departure. She didn't go quietly. Her exit email was all class, but between the lines, it read like a resignation from a sinking ship. His whiskey brand fizzled. The funding dried up. And that summer, when my restaurant group sponsored a luxury food and beverage summit in Napa, the very same one where Todd was desperately trying to secure a feature table, I made sure our PR team booked us the center pavilion. Right where every investor would walk past. His application? We passed on it. Politely, of course. With a warm thank you note and an offer for general admission tickets. He didn't attend. But I did. And when I walked past that empty booth where his brand could have been, I didn't feel triumph. Just stillness. Like the quiet after a storm. Sometimes silence says everything. I remember standing on the balcony of our Miami property that August, watching the ocean roll in like it always does, unstoppable, indifferent. There was a cocktail in my hand, condensation slipping down the glass, the city's lights blinking in the distance. That's when it hit me. I could have crushed him. Todd, I mean. I had the reach. The resources? One quiet call to a shared supplier to pull a deal. A little nudge to the real estate blog that covered boutique investors like it was gossip. One small leak about how his brand was all style, no substance. I could have buried him in a week. But I didn't. Because that wasn't the point. The point wasn't to destroy him, it was to educate him. Not with noise, not with anger, but with precision. A reminder that some people build while others bluff. And eventually, one runs out of runway. People always assume revenge feels like fire. But that's not what I felt. Not really. What I felt was control. Calm. Like I had stepped outside the story they'd all written for me. "You're just a waiter, right?" That line had echoed in my head more times than I cared to admit. Not because it hurt, but because of what it revealed, how shallow the room had been. How quick they were to laugh. How easily they measured worth with titles they didn't understand. But here's the truth, I had waited tables. Years ago. I'd scrubbed floors, washed dishes, closed up kitchens at 2 a.m. I'd done the work. I knew the rhythms of service, the heartbeat of a dining room on a Friday night, the way a perfect plate could change a person's entire week. Todd couldn't understand that. Most of them couldn't. But I didn't need them to. It was September when the reunion photos hit the family group chat. You know the ones. Everyone smiling a little too hard, arms looped around cousins they hadn't spoken to all year, plastic cups raised mid-toast. I almost didn't open them. But I did. And there it was, a still frame of the moment it all started. Todd mid-smirk. Me, standing just slightly off-center, that quiet smile playing on my face, the card halfway between my fingers and his palm. It didn't capture the silence that followed, but somehow, you could feel it in the tension of everyone's posture. Then came the messages. Uncle Don. Still thinking about that moment you handed Todd your card. Classic. Hope you're doing well. Aunt Lorna. Next time you're in town, we'd love to try one of your restaurants. Maybe the one in Boston. My sister Erin. I had no idea Halcyon was your company. You always were quiet about your success. And then, one that gave me pause. My mom. I looked you up today. Your restaurants, they're beautiful. I'm proud of you. I sat with that one for a minute. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me how little any of them had actually known about my life. Not once had they asked what I'd been building. Not once had they shown interest unless it was wrapped in a crisis or wrapped around someone like Todd. But now, they were scrambling to rewrite the narrative. To place themselves beside me, after they had all stood behind him. I didn't reply to the thread. I didn't need to. Instead, I'd booked a private dinner at one of our original locations, the kind of intimate setting where every dish was plated like art, and every guest left knowing they'd witnessed something rare. And I invited them all. Not out of spite. Out of closure. We booked the entire mezzanine floor, not because we needed the space, but because I wanted them to feel it. The privacy. The intention. Every detail was curated, low candlelight, an open kitchen view, a string quartet playing something soft and wordless in the background. They arrived dressed like they were going to a wedding. Todd was the last to show. He looked tired. Diminished. He gave me a brief nod across the room, the kind people use when they're not sure if they're welcome. I returned it. They were seated at a long oak table, real linen, handwritten menus, wine already breathing. No one said much at first. They didn't know what this was. Revenge? Celebration? A trap? I let them wonder. Once the first course arrived, a smoked duck confit with burnt orange glaze, I stood, raised my glass, and let the quiet settle. Thank you, I said. For coming. They all looked up. Even Todd. I wanted to bring you here because this. I gestured around the room. This is my world. The one none of you asked about. A few eyes dropped to their plates. I started this company with less than $10,000 and 100 rejections. I worked doubles. I slept in my car once. I waited tables, washed dishes, and poured drinks until I could afford to lease my first space. And when it failed, I opened another. And another. I looked toward Todd. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. You laughed when you thought I was just a waiter. And that's fine. But let me be clear, I'm not ashamed of that. The problem wasn't what I did. The problem was that no one here ever cared to ask. The table stayed still. Tonight isn't about proving anything. It's about perspective. Because while you were all busy measuring success by who wore what watch, or which cousin had the fanciest job title, I was building something real. No applause. No awkward coughs. Just the kind of silence that settles in when people realize the room belongs to someone they didn't see coming. I sat back down. No one spoke for a moment. Then Aunt Lorna said, barely above a whisper, "This food is incredible." Todd didn't touch his plate. They left that night slower than they came. One by one, murmured goodbyes floated across the mezzanine like cautious apologies. No one asked for a tour. No one joked about the check. They knew better now. Even Todd lingered at the door, hand on the railing, eyes scanning the tiled floor like it might give him a script. He didn't say anything. But I did. By the way, I said softly as I passed him his coat. That brownstone you were looking at in Boston? You've got a good eye. He looked up, startled. You? I nodded, slow and polite. Enjoy your evening, Todd. He left without a word. That week, I started receiving messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, not with questions or favors, but gratitude. Honest ones. My niece, Anna, sent a message that stuck with me. I didn't even know people in this family could build something like that. You made me think differently about what's possible. It wasn't about the empire anymore. It was about the quiet correction of a legacy, the shift in how they saw me, and maybe how they saw themselves. Thanksgiving came, and for the first time in 10 years, no one asked me if I was dating anyone, or what I really did for work, or why I didn't show up more. They asked about food, about design, about the cities I loved. They asked, with interest. And Todd? He still shows up. Still polished, still loud, but not in the same way. The edge is gone now. He knows the room no longer bends toward him. It doesn't need to. Because once you show people who you are, really show them, they never forget it. I don't think about Todd much anymore. Not out of bitterness, that faded long ago, but because some people are just mile markers in your story. They remind you of where you've been, not where you're going. What stayed with me wasn't the silence after I handed him that card, it was what came after. The way people changed when they realized I wasn't who they assumed. Or maybe I was, they just never looked closely enough to see. Bye-bye.